Nicomachean Ethics Book 1, The Human Good. Every craft, line of inquiry, and every action seeks some good towards an ultimate end or goal. With this, some pursuits are better than others. Pursuing actions supporting the higher goal is also good, while some actions are also subordinate to others. Aristotle notes that whatever action we do, it also contributes to an ultimate good, or an action will always result into a good, such as the action of taking classes is for the good of learning more. The action of learning more is for the good of getting a good grade in an exam, and so on and so forth. There is a hierarchy to these actions, and as I said a while ago, some actions are also subordinate to others, meaning we could also relate it to making, let's say, we can also relate it to bridle making in what it says in the book, or an accessory for the horses so that riders will have good horsemanship, and to victory in war. Although they have no correlation yet, there are a set or sequence of actions, such as good horsemanship, will have the good of a better army, and the action of a better army has the good of victory in war. And we can say that the victory of war is much more valuable than just simple bridle making. Now let's move forward. Political science is also regarded by Aristotle as the highest form of ruling service. As I said a while ago, he is trying to strive for the ultimate good. And for him, the best way to rule a city or community was political science, because it also relates to how he views things, or the study of the human soul and human condition. He can also relate it and notes that experts in their field of interest make excellent judges in that field, but the individual who is well educated in every field is unqualified for good judgment. It also basically means that he values people who are more specialized or who excel at one thing, rather than people who are good adequately at everything, but a master of none. He also notes that as a ruling science for political science, young people should not or are not expected to know how political science works, because it requires a lot of foundational knowledge, which Aristotle notes are only known by older people who experience more. Moving on, for Aristotle, happiness meant something different than it may for a reader today. Aristotle had an objective view rather than a subjective one. The majority of individuals concur that happiness is the greatest good, yet they disagree on what constitutes happiness, whether it was pleasure, whether it was passion, or whether it was just the material things. So a principle is a core idea that serves as a starting point for new learning. He also responds to Plato's assertion that there is an independent good that exists, or a singular one. According to Aristotle, that good cannot pre-exist human states, and deeds must be applicable in the real world. Now, moving on, 3 diverse ideas of joyful lives are presented by Aristotle. The first one is the lifestyle of satisfaction, the lowest form of happiness. Aristotle also notes that this is vulgar, or something that's not the best way a human should live. The next one is political science, a higher form of happiness, but it's not the greatest happiness. Until we reach to a life of study, which Aristotle mentions that it is the ultimate happiness, because he believes that humans are rational beings, and with their rational nature being in pursuant of knowledge, he believes this is where humans can achieve the highest good, or the ultimate good. Moving on, true goodness must be applicable to various virtues or diverse circumstances. Good cannot be a universal or common thing, nor does it have to endure forever in order for humans to attain it. Aristotle challenges Plato's claim that goodness is a single attribute, contending that the concept of goodness is beyond human comprehension. Goods, whether they be things, deeds, or ways of being, are too varied to be reduced to a single form. Basically, Aristotle believes that it is not a single form, but it is something made through a lot of factors. Moving on, Aristotle also notes that the good he seeks must be ultimate good. And what does that mean? So Aristotle is seeking the highest good that can be achieved by humans, which he believes is happiness. And since happiness is self-sufficient, it also means a person does not seek happiness to pursue new things, but rather people pursue or do actions to obtain happiness or in or achieve happiness in the near future. Like you could also imagine a mountain where you have different paths, but the peak of the mountain will become the ultimate good. Moving on, he categorizes goods into three categories: material goods, which are anything material such as cell phones, technology, cars, jewelry, etc. Spiritual good, where this is more on wisdom and knowledge and the like. And finally, bodily good, which is health. Aristotle believed that the best way to achieve happiness is to live a life that is balanced with these three types of goods. He argued that it's important to have enough material goods to meet our basic needs. We must have the adequate spiritual good to keep us sane, or to keep spiritual and bodily goods to keep us sane and to keep us and to give us longevity when we pursue the ultimate good. Because in order for a moral individual to carry out his purpose, or what we call telos, by Aristotle, there must be a balance or equilibrium of material good, spiritual good, and bodily good. He also notes that after he also knows a person's legacy may alter after their passing, but it doesn't really impact enough because it is nothing to worry about based on Aristotle. Happiness. Aristotle also notes that happiness is acknowledged and admired rather than praised because it is something that is earned through our own efforts. It is not something that is given to us by others. Therefore, happiness must be superior to other qualities and more godlike. Moving on, rational and non-rational soul elements are separated. Aristotle considers the whole human being as a thinker with goals and an animal with appetites. So let's dive in with the first sentence. Rational and non-rational soul elements are separated. This means there are two parts of our soul. The first one, the rational being a plant-like component where it focuses on the nutrients and growth. While the non-rational soul is an instinct which regulates cravings and desires. In a manner similar to reason, reason must accept desire, but desire must submit to reason. It means that our rational faculties and our desires are both important parts of who we are, but that our reason should ultimately be in control throughout our lives. And finally, Aristotle considers the whole human being as a thinker, reiterating or proving the fact that our reason should ultimately be in control. So as a thinker with goals and an animal with appetites. So we have the ability to reason and to set goals, but we also have desires and appetites that can sometimes lead us astray. So Aristotle believed that the ultimate end or purpose of human life is to achieve our telos, our purpose, or what we were designed to do. And how we are designed to live. It is our unique potential.
In chapter 2 of Aristotle's Nicomachean Ethics, chapter 1 discusses about how the virtues relate to nature. According to Aristotle's Nicomachean Ethics, Book 2, there are two types of virtue, intellectual virtue and virtues of character. Intellectual virtue is acquired through teaching and learning, such as wisdom and good judgment. Virtues of character, on the other hand, is a habituation, forming and practicing good habits. It does not arise on us by nature. However, nature gives us the capacity to acquire them, and by habituating them is where we completely gain virtues of character. Virtue is a natural capacity that is perfected by habitual activity. They are not gift from gods or a random product of nature that we had on birth. It is not inherited on us nor new to us. Rather, it is an ability that we already have. So how do we acquire virtues of character? If we have something by nature, we would possess the capacity first, only afterwards that we would perform the activities that go along with the capacity. An example is our senses. We are able to see and hear, but we already possess those abilities in our eyes and ears before we can actually do things such as watching TV or listening to music. Virtues are not like that. We need to train them. Virtues are like skills. We acquire them by exercising them, then the only way to become courageous is practicing courageous activities in example of virtuousness. So how do we improve our virtues of character? According to Aristotle, the origin and development of virtue are the same of its corruption. Having a virtue of character is much more like developing a skill where I have to go and practice. Practicing badly would cause me to be corrupted. An example is a lyre player. According to him, it is only then by playing a lyre that there will be a good and bad lyre players. To become a good lyre player, you need to play the lyre well repeatedly and develop good habits. As for a bad lyre player, you need to play lyre badly over and over and developing bad habits. This would be a great analogy for virtue. If this was not the case, then there would be no need to teach the lyre the same as virtue. So why good habits from youth are critical? How does a person become courageous and how does person become coward? They act in certain circumstances and they are guided by their role model. If I imitate a poor role model, I will become a coward. If I imitate a good role model, I will become courageous. This is why good habit from youth are critical. This is why we must also give a certain character to an activity. It's the way in which how we do things is how it's going to affect our character, since it is on the difference between them that the resulting state depend. Virtuous action can only be described generally and outlined. The answer cannot be specified exactly. We can only give sort of outline and of what virtuous behavior is. The reason is virtue is a subject that deals with subject circumstances of wide variety of people and the huge diversity of situations. We are not going to be able to give the exact formula to be courageous that will apply to every situation. A great analogy would be reality of human diet. We need to watch over what we eat. Some people need a high protein diet, but to others it would be a disaster. The same as to pregnant women that follow a specific diet. Human diets are enough while I can give you a general outline approximately 2,000 calories a day for an active person. Under unusual circumstances, there is no exact formula of calorie intake that will apply to every single person. Ethics in virtue is like some sort of diet. You can think of it like that way. Virtue is corrupted by excess and deficiency. According to Aristotle, virtue is said to be corrupted with lack or too much. An example would be the human body. Too much exercise and too little ruins one's strength. Likewise, eating too much or little ruins one's health. The same goes for virtue. Take, for example, courage. Lack of courage will make the person coward, while too much courage will make the person rash. Only it can preserve by the meaning between the excess and the deficiency. In chapter 3 of Aristotle's book, Moral Virtue, he discusses the importance of pleasure and pain in virtue. Aristotle lays the foundation for his ethical philosophy by emphasizing the connection between virtue, pleasure, and pain, and how our attitudes and actions regarding these emotions shape our moral character. Virtue involves feeling pain and pleasure at appropriate objects. Good people feel pleasure at the right things at the right way at the right time. But bad people, they enjoy things that should not be and pain by things that's supposed to be pleasing to well-regulated adults. Pleasure and pain reaction is wired. It is because of pleasure and pain that people become bad. People often do bad things because of the pleasure involved, or they abstain from noble actions because of the associated pain. Virtue, therefore, involves training oneself to take pleasure in virtuous acts or to endure and not be pained by what is morally right. Pleasure and pain are signs of our character. Aristotle begins by suggesting that we can discern a person's character by observing their emotional responses to actions. He argues that pleasure or pain that follows an act can be indicate indicative of a person's moral character. For example, someone who abstains from bodily pleasures and finds pleasure in doing so is considered temperate, while someone annoyed by abstaining is self-indulgent. Aristotle notes that the punishment is a means of curing undesirable behaviors by inflicting pain. This aligns with the idea that virtue and vice are closely tied to a pleasure and pain, and punishment is a way to correct this imbalance. Aristotle recognizes the powerful influence of pleasure on human behavior. Pleasure is deeply ingrained in our lives from infancy, making it challenging to resist. People often measure their actions based on pleasure and pain, which underscore the importance of understanding and controlling these emotions. Aristotle acknowledges that it is harder to resist pleasure than anger, but he believes that virtue and moral excellence are concerned with what is difficult. He suggests that virtue is better when it is harder to achieve. How action causes character? Is it good actions that cause us to become good people, or is it the other way around that good people do good actions? And it is not the case we become good people through good activity. If we do what is literate or musical, we must be literate or musical. But this is not true according to Aristotle, for one can produce something musical by chance or under instruction from another. Someone will only be musical then when he produces music and does so in a musical way. Similarly, in order for an action to be virtuous, we have to be in the right state when we do it. We must know that we're doing virtuous action. We must decide on the virtuous action for itself and nor any incentive that we get. We must choose the virtuous action from a firm and unchanging character. Becoming a good person allows us to being able to easily choose good action in the future and can be achieved by practicing the virtues frequently. So there are two types of mean, the absolute mean and the relative mean. The absolute mean is the point exactly halfway between the two extremes. It can be found by formula, but at the same time, the problem is it is formulae. Ethics is a science of circumstances of life which is so various that we can't get the same level of precision that we would get in mathematics. While the relative mean, for example, if 2 pounds of food is little and 2 pounds of food is too much, it would be foolish to take the absolute mean that everyone should eat 6 pounds of food. The intake should be relative to each person. For an athlete, more for an athlete and less for a child. Relative mean also focuses on to make our best judgment call, and to Aristotle, the mean is virtue to our circumstances. Fear, confidence, appetite, anger, pity, and in general, pleasure and pain can be experienced too much or too little. In both ways, they are not well. But to experience them at the right time, at the right things, towards the right person, and in the right way is the mean of virtue. Virtue is just like state of involving rational choices, consisting mean relative to us and determined by reason. Just like archery, there are many ways to miss the mark and only one way to hit it. We missed with we miss the relative mean by too much and excess of these actions. To be to be good people, we need to become skilled at judging to be good people, we need to become skilled at judging feeling and according to the mean, at the right way, at the right time, etc. In chapter 4, Aristotle discussed that some acts have no mean. Not every action or feeling has a virtuous mean. Some actions may be deprived of themselves and should never be done by a good person. An example is there is no mean in murdering. It is not possible to commit murder at the right way and at the right time. Doing such thing misses the mark of excellence. There is no virtuous mean for being a coward. There's no such thing as being a coward in the right way at the right time. For it is the deficiency of being courageous. The coward has little of boldness in them, while the courageous has the right amount. Specific example of mean, the relative mean, and the extremes. An example would be fear and confidence. But courage is the mean. Courage has the right amount of fear in the face of danger and shows the right amount of confidence. That person is courageous and will make the right judgment call most of the time. Nature seems to wire us in the direction of overdoing with regard to pleasure. In the giving and taking of money, the mean is generosity. Being too stingy misses the mean deficiency. Giving away too much is the excess.
The book 10 is titled Pleasure, Happiness. This is the last book of the Nicomachean Ethics and is divided into 9 chapters. The first chapter opens up about the two opposed views about pleasure. Aristotle states that for some say pleasure is the good, while others, on the contrary, say it is thoroughly bad. This basically means that different views about pleasure confuse the people to what the good really is. Some people think pleasure is the ultimate good, while others think or are persuaded to think pleasure is evil. Aristotle feels these inaccurate arguments are based on actions and feelings rather than facts, which are the basis of true arguments. In chapter 2, he discusses his view that pleasure is the good. In this chapter, some philosophers like Aristotle's contemporary Eudoxus think pleasure must be the highest good since all animals seek pleasure and avoid pain consistently. Aristotle agrees that will usually choose pleasure over pain and agrees that pleasure is choiceworthy in its own right. Plato also argues that pleasure must be combined with prudence to produce the highest good. However, as Aristotle already stated, the highest good will be self-sufficient without adding anything else. Therefore, pleasure cannot be good. In chapter 3, he presents us his discussion of the view that pleasure is wholly bad. He states that nor again if pleasure is not a quality, does it follow that it is not good. For the activities of virtue are not qualities either, nor is happiness. In this chapter, Aristotle believes pleasure is a good, only but not the highest good. The quantity of pleasure can vary. Individuals can experience different levels of pleasure. The experience of pleasure is not characterized as a process, as an individual has the ability to move into a state of pleasure instantly. Aristotle uses the examples of needing to be just to feel the pleasure of a just person, and needing to be a musician to feel the pleasure of a musician. Certain pleasures can be considered acceptable and desirable, whilst others may be deemed disgraceful. It becomes evident then that neither pleasure is good nor all pleasure is desirable, and that some pleasures are desirable in their own right, varying in sort of source from the others. So much for what is stated about pleasure and pain. The next chapter talks about the definition of pleasure. This chapter includes the fullest defense of the claim that pleasure is not a mood. Aristotle reiterates that pleasure is not a process or a becoming. Unlike processes and becomings, pleasure can be instant, complete, and whole at any time. Aristotle determines that pleasure is a completion or consequence of an activity, but that humans cannot be in a constant state of pleasure. Instead, pleasure comes as a result of certain enjoyable activity. Living itself is a state of pleasure. That is why everyone seeks pleasure in different ways in their lives. Chapter 5 discusses the pleasures that pleasures differ with the activities which they accompany and complete. In this chapter, Aristotle returns to the distinction between various pleasures. Virtuous pleasure results from a good activity, while base pleasure results from a bad activity, just as good or bad desires result in good or evil behaviors. Different people can participate in the same activity, yet some enjoy it more than others. So what are the greatest pleasures? Again, Aristotle refers to the excellent or virtuous person as the standard. True pleasures or truly human pleasures are those that complete out a virtuous person's activities. In chapter 6, Aristotle is ready to return to the question at the beginning of the Nicomachean Ethics. What is happiness? Happiness does not lack anything but is self-sufficient. He's established that happiness is a self-sufficient activity and desirable in its own right. Virtuous people do not live their lives seeking amusement and relaxation constantly. For, in a word, everything that we choose for the sake of something else, except happiness. He states that happiness, therefore, does not lie in amusement. It would indeed be strange if the end were amusement, for amusement is a sort of relaxation, and we need relaxation because we cannot work continuously. Relaxation then is not an end, for it is taken for the sake of activity. Virtuous people do not live their lives seeking amusement and relaxation constantly. The virtuous life requires a focus on serious actions, and bodily pleasures cannot provide complete happiness either, since even base people enjoy these. In chapter 7, he presents us the contemplative life is the happiest. He states that if happiness is activity in accordance with virtue, it is reasonable that it should be in accordance with the highest virtue, and this will be that of the best thing in us, whether it be the reason or something else that is the element which is thought to be our natural ruler and guide, and to take thought of the thing noble and divine. Chapter 7 basically asks us, if happiness is the supreme goal of humans, what supreme virtue can lead them there? The state of understanding, Aristotle decides, is what gets human closest to the divine. Understanding is reached through study or activity in accord with wisdom. Study meets all the criteria for an action to bring complete happiness. It is continuous and can last throughout a life. The last chapter, or the second to the last chapter, talks about the superiority of the contemplative life further considered. He states that, but in a secondary degree, the life in accordance with the other kind of virtue is happy, for the activities in accordance with this befit our human state. This basically tells us that virtues of characters are essential, and so is prudence, which is a vital part of virtue. All other virtues are secondary to wisdom, understanding, and study. Although study is the key ingredients to a happy life, it does not complete the picture. A happy person needs physical health, food, and other essentials, but not many. Aristotle says readers should apply the principles he is discussing to their lives and see if they are useful. He concludes that the wise person whose activity accords with understanding will be the most blessed by the gods, since understanding is the most godlike activity. It's reasonable for the gods to favor humans who enjoy understanding. The last chapter tells us that legislation is needed if the end is to be attained. It transitions us to the politics. So in chapter 9, it serves as two purposes. It sends readers off with an imperative to act on their knowledge, and it reiterates the significance of moral education. Although civilized young people can learn about virtue and practice it, many still have not mastered virtue. They avoid bad actions only because they fear punishment, and they seek mediocre pleasures. Aristotle thinks nature, habit, and teaching need to be combined to create virtuous life. To conclude, a society needs laws that encourage good actions and punish bad actions. Community upbringing and individualized education are ideal for raising good citizens and good people. Therefore, Aristotle considers how aspiring lawmakers and politicians should educate themselves.